Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's Friday morning, so a little later than usual, but hopefully everybody had enough time to get their questions in, so let's jump in and see what we got. First up, over on Floatplane, Dumez wants to know if someone already has a Linux distro running, is there a package that you could install to get RetroNAS installed on that? And the answer is yes, you could just go through the RetroNAS command line installation process, exactly the same as I showed in the video. You just do it on your PC instead of a Raspberry Pi or something like that. However, that will open up ports depending on what packages of RetroNAS you install that could affect security. So it's one of those things where if you have a VM running only when you're using RetroNAS, it's never really an issue. But if you leave it running 24/7 and you have some of those things that open up internet access to older computers, that could potentially open up some security stuff. So it's not really recommended. You could totally do it, especially if it's just like a dedicated server that you only have on every now and then. But what might be better is just to create a virtual machine and install RetroNAS under there, which should be pretty straightforward, especially if you're already a Linux user. And that kind of allows you to have a little bit more control over everything. You also asked about TrueNAS, and I don't know anything about that software. I do know that there's an Unraid installation of it, which works great. I have that all linked on the website, but Unraid is paid software that does a lot of what TrueNAS already does. So it's really up to you which one you would choose. So I guess I'm going to just leave links to the RetroNAS installation and I guess the Unraid package for it, just in case you want to go down that road. But yeah, it's kind of my thoughts on it. I am far from a Linux expert. I would actually just call myself a beginner at Linux, even though I have a lot of experience. I don't have the in-depth knowledge I do for like Windows and DOS and stuff like that. So maybe I'm missing something. So any Linux people who are listening via an audio player you launched via command line, maybe you want to chime in and correct me if I get any of that wrong, but I think that's the basic overview. So I'll leave links to everything. Now moving over to Patreon, a couple of questions from Kenny Rydell. First, have I ever heard of the metalcore band Lost Souls? Their new album came out today, and they already have a couple of songs out from it. Kenny's favorites are Dopamine and Mosh Lord. And no, I hadn't heard of them, but I definitely checked out their YouTube page before answering this question. And yeah, it's definitely the type of stuff that I would listen to. It sounds a lot like many of the other bands that have been coming out the past couple of years, which isn't an insult. I mean, trends happen, right? The mid 2000s had all of those bands with like the keyboards in them and stuff like that, and I like all of that stuff, but they kind of reminded me a little of Attack, I think. And I don't know, I have a friend that still kind of has their finger on the pulse of what's going on in metal, and she always sends me new bands to listen to, and I buy basically all of the albums that she sends me, and they're always kind of on rotation in my car, but there's very few of the songs that really latch on to me like some of the other music. Now, of course, age has a lot to do with that. When you're pre-25 years old, there's some songs that your brain just loves, and you're going to carry those with you for the rest of your life, and it's harder to have an impact like that, but a lot of my favorite songs have come out in the last 15, 20 years. And I even love some of the last couple albums the bands I've been listening to forever put out. So I'm certainly not one of those people that only loves original stuff that I grew up with. But yeah, I'm always interested in stuff a little different. And my ADHD brain loves when a bunch of stuff's going on at the same time, which is probably the main reason I love metal. Same thing with Spanish acoustic guitar, some classical stuff that I don't listen to often, but it's the same type of everything going on at once. And I like melody too. So a lot of the screaming, I'm listening. I treat the screaming as if it's another instrument, and I don't even think of it as vocals. And then when the hook kicks in or something like that, then I'll listen to the vocals. But everybody's ears are different. If you say it sounds like noise, that is totally fair. It's also very rude. I would never say that about your music, but it's also very fair. So whatever, to each their own. But I'll leave a link to the band, and correct me if I got the wrong band here, but I'm pretty sure it's the same one you're talking about. I'll leave a link for anybody interested. And Kenny also wanted to mention one day they want to pick my brain about some products that they're slowly working on designing, but they need to get to the working prototype phase first. So I help people every single day in the scene, and you really have to get something working before you could spend a lot of time on it. And I'm trying to word this nicely because I want to be encouraging and supportive, but there are just a ton of people that sit around all day talking about ideas they have. I mean, that's just life, right? Any musician will tell you how many other musicians they've met that love sitting around talking about doing stuff and never actually do any of it ever. So it's the same in everything, right? Electronics, whatever. So I'm not accusing you of doing that, Kenny. I'm just saying. So for people to take you seriously, it's always good to have something working and then just kind of go from there. And it's also totally fine to have something working that you're not even really sure what the best application is. That's where I come in. That's my job. That's why I work with so many developers, where it's like, oh, hey, you know, it's like cooking, right? If you know about all these different ingredients that other people don't know about, you put them together and you make yourself an amazing meal instead of just a plain piece of whatever. So it's kind of what I do is, you know, oh, hey, this is awesome. Do you know this person? You should talk to them about this. And do you know that person? They could help you make it. And so, yeah, definitely feel free to reach out, but always try to have something working and have an idea, and also understand that, you know, if I can't wrap my head around it completely, even if it's an awesome idea, I might not be the best person, and I'll probably pass you along to somebody else. And sometimes I just am so busy, I miss it. So just keep pinging me every now and then, and hopefully I'll find time to get to everybody. But yeah, this is what I do. I love putting people together. I love helping people finish off their projects, and I work with people smarter than me every single day, and I never have a problem with that because I'm always very honest about that, and I always am honest about what I think I have to offer versus what I'm definitely not going to be able to help you out with. So yeah, fire away if you have any questions. Next up, Tom noticed that the Calipers Amazon affiliate links are broken on my modding tools page, and it looks like maybe Amazon moved or delisted the item. Tom's got a really nice set and was just curious on what my recommendations were, as they're a tool nerd always looking. And a couple of things to that. First of all, thank you for the heads up, and also thank you for paying attention to affiliate links. That is really nice of you, and I cannot tell you how appreciative I am of that stuff. But unfortunately, you have uncovered a reason why I will never be successful at this stuff, because I don't keep track of broken links and things like that, and I really should. And that obviously is always going to affect how much money I make every month, because if all of the links that I have, you know, if there's no affiliate link available, fine. But if there is, there's no difference for the people clicking on the page. It's only the difference for me. But I try to budget my time as evenly as possible, and I always miss stuff like that. So, you know, you've just exposed one of the many reasons why I'll always be broke. But thank you for that. Now, those calipers were just cheap calipers. There was nothing special about them. They just weren't terrible. And a lot of the tools that I link to are exactly that. Hey, this doesn't suck. It's very cheap. It probably won't last forever. I'm sure there's a lot of better things out there, but it doesn't suck. And you might think, well, why does that matter? Anybody who's been listening to me ramble on for, you know, the past decade or so already knows the answer, because very often you could have two tools that are the same price that look very similar, and one works totally fine and the other is a giant piece of garbage. So that's why even if something's cheap and just okay, I'll still link to it, because I just want everybody to know this isn't crap. You're not going to just throw your money in the garbage. There's definitely better stuff out there, and you know, I'll link to that when I find those. So yeah, and on the flip side, Tom, why don't you link to the ones that you bought? Which brings me to the last thing. Anybody on Patreon, Floatplane, Ko-fi, or the YouTube, I think the YouTube support service, I'm not sure, we'll put a pin in that, but at the very least, Patreon, Floatplane, and Ko-fi, if you just put a link in those, it should work. I don't think I've ever seen one deleted. So Tom, actually, if you want to just help me experiment with this, throw a link to the one that you got in, you know, this week's Q&As, so I could talk about it next week and we'll figure this out. The only time links get deleted are on YouTube comments. However, the YouTube community section for members only, I don't know if that's moderated the same way. So if anybody's listening and they're on the YouTube support, maybe you drop a link as well. YouTube videos shouldn't be deleted, but stuff like Amazon stuff might be. So if you have time to, I know everybody's busy, I'm sorry to bother you, but if you're one of the YouTube subscribers, post 2 comments. One that just said, I posted a link to Calipers, and then a separate one that's Calipers, and then that way we can see if they get deleted. But yeah, so thanks, Tom, very much. And I'd like to know which ones you are using, because mine are fine, but I'm always looking for what's a more quality solution that I could rely on. Next up, John Strom is getting ready to transfer some VHS tapes using the RetroTink 4K and will be referencing my guides. I recommended using the front inputs for capture, right? They picked up LaserBear's DB15 to enhanced S-Video adapter, and they're curious if that would make it a better option. So in my testing, no, enhanced S-Video was very specifically for like 240p over Nintendo 64. However, why don't you give it a try? And if you learn something that I missed, I'm always all ears. What I would suggest is do it my way first, using the front ports, S-Video, if possible, when you have your VHS tapes. And whatever tape you have that you think is a clear, good example, or even better, if there's one clip that's really important to you, transfer it the way that I've figured out first. Then go back and retransfer just that clip with enhanced video on through the rear port and see what happens. It could very well be that the one clip and, with the right lighting and everything else might look better for you, but generally speaking, in the tests that I was running, enhanced S-Video was not what I would suggest for any kind of home video capture. And I talked to Mike and he kind of was like, nah, I think you should use the front inputs, but hey, mess with it. Maybe you could find out something and go from there. So maybe Mike has learned more since then. It's been months ever since I put that video out, but yeah, that's kind of my suggestion. But let me know what you think. I mean, maybe it would be better for you. Maybe it's going to be a preference thing, like people who turn on vivid mode on their TV. I'm kidding. But yeah, give it a try and see what you think. And, if you think it's something I need to revisit, I absolutely will. I've been working with somebody to try to revisit both of those profiles to tweak the colors. Now, I'm going to say right up front, when I say tweak it, this is like our OCD nerd always going back, trying to make everything as good as possible tweaking. If you rip all of your VHS tapes today using the guides that I have out now, and then we update those profiles a month from now, you don't need to go back and re-rip any of those. This is just trying to tweak it every little bit that you can. And the minor little differences now, if you're a perfectionist and you somehow have color bars to reference on your VHS tapes, you could actually do that in post as well. But I just wanted to throw that out there too. Like if anybody is in the midst of transferring all of their stuff and you see any profile updates come out in the next couple of months, there is not going to be some holy crap massive difference that's going to make you want to recopy them. It's just further tweaking that we're always doing on all of these profiles. So just wanted to give everybody a heads up so you don't go, oh, what the heck? I just spent like a week doing that. Don't worry, you're still good. Next up, Christopher Skirick has an audiophile question. I am not an audiophile. I just play one on YouTube, but I'm going to roll with this. First, when they use a premium AV receiver for retro gaming with a 5.1 configuration and upmix it, they think generally background music tends to be sent to the central speaker and sound effects on the left and right channels, when we, of course, would probably want the opposite, background music on both front speakers and mainly voices on central. Is it just that their Denon 4311 is too old and doesn't decode it as well? I don't know. And that's why I often don't really mess with that, because don't forget what I do for a living, right? I have to overanalyze all of this stuff. So when it comes time to sit down and play a game, if it's something that was originally in stereo, I often just like using my two speakers. And depending on the setup, I might just go full digital in, or I might take like a Genesis Model 1, having the analog audio go into my NAD amp with the analog bypass mode on through those two front speakers. It sounds ridiculously good to me. And yes, I'm sure I could start messing with the different modes on my receiver and try to get surround to work. And I'm positive that at least one or two games would sound better that way. But that's a lot of time spent, and then I'll start messing with it, and then I'll sink into the game, and 2 minutes will go by, and I'll hear a sound effect and go, I should mess with the audio again. And then instead of playing a game, I spend the next minute or the next hour messing with audio, kind of like I do with a lot of my video settings and stuff like that. So, yeah, I'm probably the worst person to ask that, because when it's time to play, if it was in stereo, definitely I would just enjoy it that way. And if it's got anything like the Dolby Surround built in, like the Pro Logic stuff, I would totally use that too. But yeah, that's a question that probably people in the comments would be better able to help you out with. However, just flip through the different modes on your receiver and see. I just don't know if any would ever really do what you're looking to do, at least consistently. Next question, they're thinking of buying a full made in Japan vintage and shielded setup. Any audiophile feeling about it? They know Japanese speakers are not well considered in Europe and in the US. So I think that's just for weight and import reasons. I don't think there's any reason why you would or would not want to buy a speaker from any particular country. And that's certainly the people I've always rolled with. I mean, we're completely agnostic to where something comes from as long as it's good. That's really the only yeah, it's the only box we put things in. Like where it comes from is far down the line of the question we're asking versus like, how is it made? How does it sound? You know, is it reliable and all that stuff? But my feeling on any used equipment at all is any electronic hardware, expect just like video games. You're probably going to have to replace the capacitors at some point. You're probably going to have to replace the power supplies. And with audio equipment, that's when these little details really, really start to matter. You have to get the right caps. You have to get the right rated ones. You have to probably go on different forums and Discord servers and talk to other people who have restored them to see the sound differences before and after. And then you have to filter out all the people that think they could tell the difference between two identical spec capacitors from good brands. So when they're listening, it's like, it's rough. But the one thing I will say is with speakers, you really want to physically look at that speaker. Is the cone dried and cracked when the music is playing or any sound is playing? How does it look when the cone is reverberating? And I am far from an expert on that, but I could still walk up to many older speakers and go, oh, that looks still good. And maybe it's not great, but it's not broken. And I could definitely look at others and go, no. And I don't even mean the ones that are like rotted out. I mean, sometimes you could just look at a speaker and know that thing's been overplayed and it's, you know, you would have to completely rebuild the speaker if you wanted to use it again, which is awesome if that's your goal. But if your goal is just to buy some awesome vintage equipment, plug it in and start playing, that's when you kind of have to start wondering what's the best use of your time. And that's why I've really been liking ELACs for non-shielded speakers. They're a good brand. They sound very good. They're not the best speakers I've ever heard, not even close, but they are for the price up there. And I still love the Ascend acoustics. They're a cheaper line. I ended up picking up two more for a different setup that I have and sold the other ones because I needed shielded. And they're just, yeah, I mean, they're top tier. So those are the two brands on a budget I would always recommend. And they're not cheap, but they're far cheaper than anything labeled audiophile. But if you are an audiophile, you probably are already spending far more than like, it's like $400 a set or bookshelf speakers. That's probably how much you spend on cables alone if you're a true audiophile, which I don't know if I buy that 100%, but you know what? If I had the money, I probably would do it too. So I'm certainly not putting anybody down. But yeah, those are just my thoughts, mostly opinions on that. The only fact would definitely be expect to have to restore any vintage electronics and be very careful making sure that you inspect the physical speakers before really trying to rely on those for audio. Next up, Arkanoid recently picked up a 65-inch LG C4 using the affiliate link, right? No, I'm kidding. And they've been reorganizing their huge console computer collection. They were looking at getting the matching soundbar, sub, and wireless speakers. They were also hoping to be able to use that with their PVM-20L5 that sits right below the C4 so that they no longer need to have a separate set of speakers for it. The soundbar only accepts HDMI or optical. Do I know of any lagless device that would convert analog RCA audio to optical? Especially nice would be one that could decode ProLogic 2 and send that over optical. So I have two answers for you. First and foremost, if your 20L5 is sitting right below your C4, you're not going to want to put a modern soundbar right above it because that's not going to be shielded. And that could cause some damage to your PVM. And that's a really, really nice PVM. And that's one of those things where often people ask me, you know, what do I think the minimum distance from unshielded speakers is? And when you start getting into much more expensive RGB monitors like that, I would be even more cautious to the point where if you've already invested in a gorgeous OLED TV, I really do love those. Like all affiliate jokes aside, like I love that TV. It's the second best I've ever owned. So you've already invested in that. You already invested in a 20L5 PVM, which is just an awesome, awesome monitor. So why not just get yourself some Ascend Acoustic shielded bookshelf speakers and then try to get a receiver that can handle it. And then if you try to figure out where to go from there. That was kind of the purpose, one of the many purposes of that surround sound music first video I did, which I don't know, I'm always terrible at naming these things. If anybody has a suggestion for a better way to rename it, I'm sure Mason could make me an updated thumbnail as well. But the whole point of that is exactly your scenario, right? You have a beautiful TV, a beautiful RGB monitor. So picking up a soundbar, sub, and wireless speakers, it's great, right? That's probably going to sound really nice, but what about just having stereo speakers? So that way you could enjoy music that in stereo, you could enjoy classic video games in the stereo they were probably already in, and then see how it works with your setup. The setup that I have in my living room is just 2 speakers and an amp. And because of the direction of the room, like the shape of the room where the speakers are pointing, so often it just sounds ridiculously good. Just 2 speakers. And sometimes a lot of TV shows have cool effects where they're kind of out of phase. So even though there's 2 speakers, you sort of hear the effects coming around you. And once again, you know, the speakers, the placement, the room you're in, all of that makes a big difference. And maybe you don't have the space to put 2 bookshelf speakers next to your TV. That's totally fair. But I would see if you had the space for it, because you could start out that way, start with a good 2-channel amp, and then just go from there and see what you got. And then afterwards, it's like, okay, you know, the sound from the vocals or, you know, whatever the main center channel is fine mixing to the 2 fronts. So now I'm going to get 2 rear speakers, and then I'm going to get this. And, you know, you could just kind of build upon that. So, you know, that was a much longer answer than you were probably looking for, but it's not as easy as just saying, yeah, that'll be fine. And get yourself a converter. And, you know, you absolutely could convert RCA to optical with many cheap converters out there, and going analog to digital is much more forgiving than going from digital to analog. And if anything has Dolby Pro Logic 2, it would come through the conversion. It's not going to get filtered out, but then you would also have to have a different receiver that could decode it. And that's when you start getting into stuff like, are you going to go and buy an old amp and run it just through its pass-throughs? Why not get a modern amp that also uses it? Or that also supports it. So I'll leave a link to those audio videos that I did. And even if some of them bore you to death, maybe just sit through them anyway, suffer through it, and see if you can get some tips. Because you might walk away from that going, no, I get what Bob was trying to go for, but that is not applied to my setup. It is stupid for me. I don't like it. I still think you might actually not only just reinforce your point, you might get some tips out of there like, Bob's solution sucks for me, but that thing that he did over here might work for. So that's kind of how I try to present all of my videos is, you know, here's what works for me. Well, all the videos like that are opinion based. Here's what works for me. Here's the stuff that I tested, see if it could work for you, and kind of go from there. And, you know, who knows? Maybe you're just going to end up with 2 speakers and an awesome little amp and have everything that you need, or maybe you're going to go right back to what you had. But either way, I'll leave links to basically everything for you. Well, that's it for this time. As always, ask any question you would like wherever it is that you support. Just please do so in the latest Q&A post, because I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, as you saw here today, I like just scrolling through the different services as if we were hanging out somewhere, just a laid back conversation together. So any question you want, just the latest post wherever you support. And as always, thanks to everybody who supports in absolutely any way, because it really is you who's keeping all this stuff going. So thanks very much, and I'll see you next week.